Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining today's webinar, Security Operations or Not, the business impact of detection and response. My name is Clint Walker with Mobius Partners. Joining me for today's session is Christopher Field with Arctic Wolf. Before we begin, I want to do a brief intro of Mobius Partners. Mobius Partners is a relationship-driven IT solutions provider, offering best-of-breed technology and services for large enterprise organizations, as well as small and medium-sized businesses, SMBs. Keeping up with changing technology and responding successfully requires a partner with deep technical expertise, a get-it-done attitude, a primary focus on your unique business outcome. We provide continuous, responsive, and affordable support to ensure your technology works as you need it and delivers outcomes that matter. Our technical team communicates in a language everyone understands and answers questions no one knew to ask. If you have any questions during this webinar, please submit them using the Q&A box on your console. We want today's session to be interactive. We will try to answer as many questions as we can, but if we run out of time, we'll be sure to follow up with you via email. As a thanks for attending today's webinar, you'll be receiving a $25 pizza gift card to have lunch on us. Lastly, today's session is being recorded and will be shared with you via email. Now let's hand things over to Christopher Field as he dives into business impact of detection and response.
Okay, yes, thank you. And thank you all for joining. So yes, my name is Christopher Fielder. I am the field CTO here at Arctic Wolf. I've been with the company for a few years now, and I've actually been in the cybersecurity space in one capacity or another for a little over 22 years now. So it's been quite a while. So I appreciate you inviting me and giving me the time to talk a little bit here about our topic today, which is security operations or not, and the business impact of detection and response. And you know, that's one of the things that we offer here at Arctic Wolf is our managed detection and response service. So we're going to talk a little bit about some trends in the security world, some things that are happening, and how detection and response, being able to detect quickly and respond appropriately, can actually have a positive impact on some of the things that are happening right now. So we'll jump straight into it here. And we're going to jump in and start with a bold statement that really shouldn't be bold. And that's that cybersecurity should reduce cyber risk. Again, you know, it shouldn't be mind-blowing, but it's actually not happening. You know, let's step back and actually think about this for a minute. And let's replace the word cyber with physical. And we would say, you know, physical security should reduce physical risk. And that makes sense, right? You think about that and you go, well, if I put a seatbelt on, and if I were to get into some sort of an automobile accident, that should reduce the risk of me getting some sort of an injury. And that actually occurs, right? That's why it's recommended everybody wear seatbelts and takes the proper precautions. But when we say cybersecurity should reduce cyber risk, it should happen, but unfortunately, we're seeing that it's not always happening. 87% of security leaders right now believe that their organization is actually falling short in addressing cyber risk. What's interesting about this is, so this is a vast majority of the leaders that are out there in security are saying, you know what? I am not in a better place. I'm actually in a worse place. We're falling short on addressing the risk of a cyber incident to our organization, but the amount that they're spending is increasing. The focus they're putting on this is increasing, and they're still falling short. And why is that? And we did a lot of research into this, and we came to this conclusion, which is kind of obvious, right? That cybersecurity has an effectiveness problem. We put a few things together to kind of come to this conclusion that spend is up, how much is being spent, the amount of threats are increasing, but there is a shortage of individuals. There's an operation problem happening right now. There's not enough individuals, kind of people in seats to fill the positions. And unfortunately, a lot of organizations are trying to fill that gap with more technology. And that's actually becoming detrimental because you can't replace people with just more tech in the stack. So there is this effectiveness problem that we're seeing, and it's, again, causing quite a bit of problems out there. So some observations that go along with this. So, why is risk, or the feeling that organizations are falling short, why is that increasing? Well, there's a few factors at play here. So right now, the likelihood of an incident is increasing. So two key metrics here that we see: 40-day increase in the time it takes to patch a critical vulnerability. That means it's taking an additional 40 days to patch a critical vulnerability. So let's really think about that. So that means a critical vulnerability, meaning a vulnerability or a weakness in an organization that has a known exploit, and there's possibly even an active campaign going on against that vulnerability, is not just taking 40 days, but taking an additional 40 days to patch, which means this vulnerability could be out there for 3 months, 4 months, 6 months. That's not unheard of. And there are attackers that are making use of these exploits and these vulnerabilities. That results in 59% of organizations were breached within the last year. That is 3/5 almost of organizations that are currently in business have been breached in one form or another. That is astronomical when we really think about it, right? Especially when we compare it to the amount of money that's being spent. And then we talk about the impact of an incident. So right now, the mean time to detect an incident is 206 days, meaning, okay, an attacker or malicious actor has breached your environment. They're in there. Now it could take 206 days or more to actually detect that. And once it's detected, then you start the process of starting to eliminate it and recover. So that's, a long time. And that time is resulting in an $8.6 million average cost of a data breach. And that's a number that's thrown around a lot, right? So that is a number that was coming to you from a report that was put out recently, and it is well known, and it is a large amount of money. So $8.6 million when one of these data breaches occur, and they're occurring on a regular basis. These are all very scary numbers. And when we take a look at this and we start reading into these reports and the research, that shows us why so many leaders out there have that feeling that, I'm not in any better place than I was, and risk is increasing. So that is cyber risk. And this is what we really at Arctic Wolf want to reduce. We want to reduce, or we want to end, cyber risk. And I know that's an interesting thing to say, right? We want to end cyber risk. So let me get on my soapbox here for a minute and kind of talk about that. But, if you've been in the cybersecurity space for a little while, and you've maybe taken the CISSP, the SSCP, any of those certs or studied for them, they talk a lot about risk. And they say there's a lot of things that you can do with risk. You can minimize it. You can transfer it, you can accept it, you can try to mitigate it, but there's one thing you can never do with risk, and that is eliminate it. You can't end it. That's the one thing you can never do with risk. And that runs contrary to what we're trying to say here, that our goal is to end cyber risk. So why is that? How do we kind of work those two together? Well, we put actually a lot of thought into that. And the idea is to say that we have set an impossible goal for ourselves. We say that our goal is to end cyber risk, not to minimize it, not to reduce it, but to end it. It is a goal that we will continue to work for over and over. That way, there is no end to this security journey. That way, we keep pushing further and further and increasing the effectiveness of our security operations. So that is where we kind of get that logo from. I always like to kind of explain that. So let's talk about some additional impact that all these things are having on the cybersecurity world and some additional statistics. So we've done research of our own, and we've actually collected a lot of research that we see in the market as well. And we use this to feed back into, well, how do we deliver the best service for our customers, and how do we push this further into that goal of ending cyber risk? So some of the numbers that we found here. So we put out at the beginning of this year a State of Cybersecurity 2022 trends report. I suggest everyone, if you got time, go take a look at that report. You can find it on our website. We found a lot of very interesting things on there. One thing here that we want to point out is 700 million attacks used ransomware or extortionware of some sort in 2021, last year. 700 million attacks using ransomware. That is a crazy number. And that makes me believe that if this trend continues, it's not going to be long before we start to see 1 billion ransomware attacks in an average year. That's really a lot. According to IBM, organizations, it takes them 49 days longer than average to identify and contain ransomware breaches that took place between March of 2021 and March of 2022. That goes back to another statistic we just talked about. The time it's taking to identify, respond, contain, and recover from all of these things, particularly ransomware, is increasing. So now we're saying 49 days. That's almost 2 months that it's taking organizations to actually find and then contain this ransomware. What makes that so interesting is if you've suffered from ransomware or been a part of a ransomware compromise, you know that these aren't quiet things, right? So it happens. Usually you're notified very quickly because boxes start getting locked down. There's the ransomware that's requested. So to think that, it's taking this long to identify and contain it means that most organizations probably don't have the proper resources available that when this occurs, that they then can move on it quickly and start to recover from it. That goes back to that effectiveness problem we talked about. In 2021, there was a 95% of cases that were ransomware related. The median loss was over $11,000. So $11,150. That's kind of that average, the median loss. So that doesn't sound like a lot, but it is when we consider something that we're going to jump down to at the bottom down here, which is high profile attacks have actually caused enterprises to kind of shore up their security. They have the money, they can pay the best fees to individuals, they can pay the best salaries, so they can really have high quality stocks. But that leaves a lot of small to medium sized businesses out in the cold when it comes to cybersecurity. And what have these ransomware gangs and ransomware attackers pivoted to? Attacking those SMBs. And they know they're not going to get the huge paydays from these smaller organizations, so they ask less. Because right above we see last year, the highest ransom ever paid on record, $40 million, occurred last year. That one, and one like that, might only occur once, twice in an attacker's, career. So that's a great payday for them and that ransomware gang. But they can make a lot of money as well doing maybe 1 or 2 attacks per day to a small to medium-sized business, asking what they consider to be a reasonable sum of a little over $10,000. And in a year, that could be what? $3 million, $6 million, like depending upon how much they're doing this and how effective they are. It's a lot of money in the long run. So, this is very scary stuff, again, that's happening out there right now. And then compliance. Compliance is a big component of cybersecurity. And we're seeing that, there's some benefits and some drawbacks of incorporating compliance into a lot of security programs. So we did some research on this recently at Arctic Wolf, and we came to some different conclusions here. And the first thing I want to point out here is actually not the first bullet, it's the second one. And that's that compliance does not equal security. So before I go too deep into compliance, I always like to draw that line and say that compliance can run parallel and can be associated with security, but being compliant does not mean you are secure. They're very different things. We can kind of think of compliance almost like a grade that you receive in school, right? So let's think back to when we were all in school at one time or another, and you could pass a class with a C or a D. And I know because I'm not proud of it, but I've done it, right? I've passed a class with a C and a D before. And on paper, technically, if it's pass fail, I did pass that class. But if you were to try to test me then, and especially now on some of the things that were happening in that class, I would not pass, right? So being compliant, we can think of as almost like the minimum standard to say that you are putting in efforts to reach a level of security. But just because you have met that minimum compliance standard does not mean you are fully secure. And what we're finding is that some organizations are thinking that they are the same thing, and that's leaving them open to attacks, and that's unfortunate. So determining which compliance requirements to follow can become very difficult for some organizations because they may fall under multiple compliance standards. And we're seeing that quite often. So in our research here, 87% of businesses adhere to some form of cybersecurity compliance standards. So, we're talking about almost 90% there, 87%, but only 44 of those organizations, so only 44 of the 87%, so less than half of those, have at least one dedicated full-time individual that is focusing on compliance. So that means over half of them do not have a full-time dedicated compliance team or even a full-time dedicated compliance person. Instead, they're taking compliance as this, best effort approach. We'll do what we can to meet compliance standards, but we probably won't do it, unfortunately. And in fact, some of the individuals that I spoke with when we were doing this research said that they actually factor compliance penalties and compliance fines into their cybersecurity budget. And that is not a good position to kind of work from. It's really unfortunate in those situations, because if they're not compliant, then we also have to assume then they're not secure. I know I said they're not equal, but if compliance is the minimum standard to get to security and they're not even compliant, that's a bad position to be in, unfortunately. 60% of companies spend less than 10% of their overall cybersecurity budget on compliance. And again, I know this is anecdotal based off just some discussions I had with companies, but some of them do factor fines into their budget. So if they're spending 10% of their budget on compliance, there's a possibility that 10% might just be to pay off fines and not meeting the compliance standards. Most security frameworks and compliance regulations are going to require that you establish an incident response plan. And we know that's super important, right? We talked about how the time it takes to identify and respond to a threat is increasing. One thing that can minimize that is having a good incident response plan so that when a breach is detected or identified, you can move on it quickly to recover. But we found a third of organizations do not currently maintain an active incident response plan. That means a third of organizations out there right now are really just kind of playing it by ear and have no clue what to do when an actual incident occurs. And that, again, is not a good position to be in. And that's why it's taking so long to recover from these situations. And that plays into compliance because, again, a lot of compliance standards say you have to have that IR plan written out. You have to have it practiced. You have to be prepared for it. And if they don't have that, then they're automatically going to fail that portion of compliance. Continuing on here, cyber insurance is a way that some organizations are trying to combat these situations and things that we've talked about. So they're adopting cyber insurance. We've actually seen an increase in that over the last few years, but 30% of policyholders have seen their rates either increase or get canceled within the last year. That's kind of scary, right? I mean, they're saying, okay, cyber insurance providers are losing money and they're not in the business to lose money. So they're going to raise the rates, or if they think that an organization is too much of a risk, they're just going to cancel their policy altogether. More cyber controls are needed to qualify for coverage. So they have a set standard of, hey, if you don't have at least these things, we are not going to cover you. And they're increasing what those requirements are. You have to have, antivirus at a minimum, probably EDR. You have to monitor the network in some way. You have to have 24/7, 365 coverage of individuals monitoring the environment. You have to have multi-factor authentication. You have to meet compliance standards. And if organizations don't have those things, then they're not going to qualify for cyber insurance. And if an incident occurs, that organization or that company is going to be on the hook to pay the ransom and pay whatever damages occur because of the breach. And fewer insurers are offering cyber insurance due to those heavy losses that I talked about. Insurance companies are never going to be in the business of losing money. They're in the business to make money. And if they're losing it, then they're going to make it more difficult or just simply not offer this type of coverage to a lot of organizations. So let's take a look at some threat trends. So what we're seeing right now, this actually came out of an FBI report, but business email compromise, or an attacker or series of attackers being able to compromise an organization's email, has actually resulted in a total cumulative amount of $43 billion in damages since 2016. That number is crazy. And especially crazy when we say that's just tied to the email being compromised. In some situations, the business email compromise can lead to pivoting deeper into an environment. It could be the start of an attack. It could be a subsection of an attack, or it could be the whole total of the attack, right? Where if maybe they've been able to spoof a wire transfer, do some sort of phishing, steal personal information or company information. There's a lot of things that could happen from a business email compromise. But we see right here, $43 billion in damages in just a matter of what, 6 years? That's quite a bit. And then a 33% increase in vulnerabilities. So increase the number of incidents caused by vulnerability exploitation from 20 to 2021. That's a 33%. We're seeing more vulnerabilities that are being exploited, and that is then leading to more exploitation, which is more attacks, which is costlier attacks, and everything we talked about. It's kind of a vicious cycle that's happening. And security spend continues to climb. We hit people with these numbers, we discuss this growth, and it gets people to respond and to act, and they should, but they're not always responding and acting in a way that is appropriate for their organization. We talked about how there is an effectiveness problem, and some people, some organizations still in the mindset that the way to correct this or to solve this problem is to throw more money at it and throw more money at technology. And technology is excellent. And the tools that you can buy in the cybersecurity market right now are outstanding, right? We're at kind of a renaissance of cybersecurity tools. New, amazing tools are coming out every day. Vendors are competing with one another to put out the best tool, which is making these even stronger and faster and, more advanced tools. So I really respect all that. But if you don't have the individuals as the base of your security program, then you're really throwing money at nothing. Imagine investing, $78 billion in the most amazing tools to build cars or to build houses or to build airplanes, but you don't have the workers that are able to utilize those tools. You're left with warehouses full of these advanced tools and nothing being produced. That's kind of what we're seeing right now, is that we are seeing very detailed, complicated, advanced technology stacks with very minimum amount of people that are running them. And that's where that effectiveness problem is coming into play. 1.75 trillion is expected to be the total spend on cybersecurity by 2025. Oof, that's a ridiculous number that we're planning on throwing at this problem, but it's going to all be for nothing if we don't solve that underlying effectiveness problem. If we can't go through and say that we need to build our security postures, our security programs off of smart, capable people and a 24/7, 365 position first, and then we add the tools on top of it. Would you rather have the best tool stack in the world that's being underutilized, or would you rather have the best people using a kind of slimmed down tool stack? In my experience, I'd rather have those great people. So again, what's the problem here? It's that failure of security operations, the lack of individuals that are out there that are forming the basis of your security program. So we said, we want to solve this problem. That is our goal to end cyber risk, is our holistic security operations that we deliver as a concierge service. And we use that term concierge service a lot. We were the first ones to really start to utilize that, and we still really believe it. And I have a lot of people ask me like, well, what do you mean by concierge security? How do you define that? And it can be a complicated thing to define. But I define it this way. When somebody says, what do you mean by concierge? I say, what do you need? That's the approach that we take. We don't want to limit the service that we provide to our customers to only a few things that, we're able to do for them. Instead, much like a concierge at a hotel, you can ask them almost any question and they can either get you the answer it for you, find the answer, help you come to the conclusion that you need. So if you were to invest all the money into building your own security operations center or SOC, you should then be able to stick your head in that SOC door and say, hey, I need a report on how we stand with compliance. I need to understand if we're prepared for this current threat that I just read about. I need to make sure that we are staffed 24/7, 365, and that SOC should be able to respond to all those requests. In the same way, you come to our concierge security team, you say, I need these things, and we will make sure that you get the answers that you need. We will provide you those reports. We'll work with you on those answers. So security operation outcomes that do matter to you. We follow the security operations framework, and that is being able to identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. That full life cycle of these incidents. So identifying the threats that are in the environment, identifying what the environment is, getting a full understanding of the attack surface, making sure there's no visibility gaps, and then starting to put a plan together on how to protect it all. How are we going to kind of do our best to prevent the initial attacks from occurring, taking a look at the configurations and the risks that are in the environment, and then detecting when a threat occurs and detecting it as quickly as we can. And then again, detecting in any area of the environment. We take a look at the network, the endpoints, the cloud resources. We look at behaviors. We use machine learning. We take a look at the authentication. We really want to get full visibility into the environment so we can detect these threats early on. And then we want to respond. We want to respond as quickly as we can. In many cases, that's, just jumping in and containing the threat as quickly and efficiently as we can, and then working with the customer to make sure that we respond in the way that they want us to and make sure that we have the proper outcome. And then using that information to not only recover now, but actually feeding that into what we call our security journey, so that everything that occurs in the environment is an opportunity to learn and improve. So yeah, maybe we found the potential for a breach or an early breach. Now we can use that information that we've responded to and feed that back in and start to put together a plan to ensure that doesn't happen again. And then we can branch out from there. And we want to talk about an example here of two companies, a tale of two companies. One that has, maybe they invested very heavily in their security stack and they just couldn't find the right people. And then the approach that Arctic Wolf takes. So this is company A. And the way that company A kind of laid out here, they have tools in place, but no real effective security operations. I've seen examples of this many times, right? So we'll buy the latest and greatest shiny tools and we'll say security falls under a couple of individuals that are also stuck with, the IT, server management, network management, all the different things that kind of fall under what we call the computer people, right? Some organizations still do that. And I understand if you have a limited budget and a limited resource to obtain talent, that may be the situation that you're in. But that's going to be our example for company A. And then company B has the effective security operations in place. So company a business email compromise, essentially we've seen this before and it's going to go like this. So attacker is happening, this attack is happening at 12:57 p.m. And let's say the attacker gains access to an employee's Office 365 mailbox, right? An example here based on what we've seen in the real world that we'll see again here in a moment is an attacker goes out and they actually buy some credentials on the dark web and they utilize that to obtain access to that mailbox. What are they then going to do? Well, then they're going to manipulate the user's inbox rules and pilfer email information. They're going to set up delete rules. They're going to set up forward rules. That way, if they lose access to the mailbox, they can still have emails forwarded to that malicious mailbox. They're going to have anything they don't want the user to see automatically deleted. And they're going to start to look for additional information that's residing in some of those emails. They're going to synchronize the email, maybe create an offline box that they can slowly go through and start to search through. Then they leverage email to start a phishing campaign, right? So an attack does not just do one thing. They're going to continue to pivot deeper and deeper until they reach their ultimate goal. So they want to start getting additional credentials. We can think of this almost as a form of maintaining persistence, getting additional user accounts and getting deeper into the environment and maybe obtaining an administrator account or a high profile account. So they start a phishing campaign utilizing that legitimate email that they gained access to in an unauthorized way. So then they gain access to multiple credentials. They establish persistence on a box or on a system, maybe through an @job or a scheduled task or a registry key or a script, lots of ways they can establish persistence. And then they begin pilfering and exfiltrating company data. They start taking very valuable information within the company and start slowly leaking it out. usually through some sort of a cloud resource, a Dropbox or a OneDrive, or even emailing it out. And on average, like we talked about, it's going to take most organizations about 206 days to identify a compromise like this and then begin resolving it. And that's what's going to lead to that around $8.3 to $8.6 million cost of a data breach, because it's going to exist for quite a while. And we have to think about the amount of data that this attacker has taken out of the environment. Now let's look at what could have happened. Now this actually, that last one is kind of a fictionalized version of a worst case scenario based on something that we have seen in one of our customer environments. This is a sanitized version. We took away the customer information or anything that could be identifiable, but this was something we actually responded to that was very similar. So at 12:57, the attacker did use stolen credentials, and what they actually did was sent a multi-factor authentication push to a legitimate user. So they obtained a username and password. This company was using multi-factor authentication. The attacker tried to log in. A notification went to the user's phone. Okay. Oh, can't really see my phone, but I promise there was one in my hand. So a notification went to the user's phone. The user was busy, we found out, and they weren't paying attention, and they just hit accept. And guess what? They gave the attacker access. So multi-factor authentication is not a guarantee for security. The attacker gets in and they start syncing that user's mailbox or obtaining access to the emails. What's interesting is, since we were in that environment as well and monitoring all the activity, we actually identified the use of that multi-factor authentication from an interesting location, or the acceptance of that, and we began monitoring. So we actually identified that telemetry. The attacker then opened a calendar event that was pre-existing called best practices training, and they started updating that with their own information. So this is where they start taking action to try to harvest additional user information. And they created those add and delete rules so that they could continue to get emails and then delete things they didn't want the user to see. We saw this. So we actually get the logging information from Office 365, and we saw the suspicious add and delete rules that were created. If you don't have 24/7, 365 coverage in your environment, you're probably not going to pick up on this, because this may appear as a false positive or just noise if you are not actively monitoring those different logs in the logging locations. What's beneficial for us is we're able to ingest all that telemetry and look through it, and we don't mind sifting through noise and false positives to find the true positives. In this case, we found a true positive. So our triage team begins investigating that user activity at this point. So this was about 18, 19, 20, 21 minutes after the initial attacker logged in. So less than half an hour later, our team is already actively looking into this or investigating what's occurring. Now, while they're investigating, the attacker did go through and start trying to execute a phishing attempt. So they created a malicious PDF that they loaded to OneDrive and planned to distribute through that calendar event that they manipulated. And that, I'll just tell you, that PDF had a lock on it that said, hey, if you want to open up this PDF, put in your username and password. That username and password go back to a file where the attacker would be collecting them and harvesting those credentials. As our triage team is investigating this, they actually see that user account was compromised, and they reached out to the customer at the time and said, hey, we need to disable this account, and we recommend you reset the credentials right now. The customer did say, oh, you know what? You're right. This account was compromised, and they disabled the account, and they did that with our triage team on the phone. So at that point, we said, you know what, we've actually kind of stopped the attack from this point, but this situation is not over. Now we need to put together a plan of how we're going to fully recover from this. So they started looking for any usage or any evidence of that PDF within the environment and made sure that was removed. And then they start working with the customer on a plan of action. Okay, now what do we do to make sure that we have protected those credentials? And how do we have a plan here to make sure that we are going to learn from this? Do we need to do some additional user training on the proper way to use multi-factor authentication? Is there anything else that we can start to monitor for in the environment? How do we take this again and use it as a learning experience? And again, what makes us different is our Arctic Wolf security journey. I know I mentioned this before, but this is really talking about how we want to ensure that every time that we talk to one of our customers, they are in a better place than they were the last time we spoke to them. We utilize the NIST framework or additional frameworks and compliance that our customers utilize and choose to use for their environment as kind of a guiding path for how are we going to follow this security journey. We want to make sure that we monitor all the areas of the environment and we make our recommendations from a vendor neutral standpoint. We are truly vendor neutral. We don't recommend one tool over another. Instead, we want to work with whatever is in your stack, whether it's a super advanced stack or a minimal slim stack. We want to work with that, and we build our security journey off of that. And we can make suggestions and guidance without that push for saying you have to have certain tools or certain vendors in your environment. And with that, I think we've reached time. Again, I appreciate everyone taking the time to listen to this. I know I threw a lot of information at you. What I will say is that if anyone has any questions for me, you're always more than welcome to reach out. I want to make sure I answer any of those questions. If there's anything I can do to help you, please reach out to me or anyone on the Arctic Wolf team. Feel free to reach out, and I would love to speak with you all. I hope everyone has a great day and got something from this, and I hope to see you all in the future. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you for attending today. If there were any questions we were not able to answer in the chat box, please reach out to info@mobiuspartners.com.